I can still remember the day it all changed. The air was still, and the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village. Everyone was gathered at the chief's house, waiting for the news, but I was not there. No, I was by the Baobab tree, the one where they used to meet. It was a special place for them, Temi, the prince, and Kemi, the girl who lived in a small hut on the edge of the village. No one ever thought a prince and a simple village girl would become as close as they did, but that tree held their secret. It started when they were children. Temi would sneak away from his father's palace to play near the Baobab tree. He'd climb it with the other boys, but somehow, it was always Kemi who caught his eye. She was different. While the others played and shouted, Kemi sat at the base of the tree, weaving baskets or singing songs her mother had taught her. Temi was drawn to her calmness, to the way she seemed to understand the world in a way he couldn't. One day, he climbed down and sat next to her. "What are you doing here all alone?" he asked. Kemi looked up, her big brown eyes full of quiet wisdom. "I'm never alone," she said, patting the rough back of the Baobab tree. "The tree is here with me." Temi laughed, thinking she was just being silly. But as the years passed, he learned that Kemi was never silly. She saw the world differently, and somehow, she helped him see it that way too. Every day after his royal duties, Temi would come to the tree, and every day, Kemi would be there, waiting. They'd talk about everything, about his lessons, her family, the stars above. It was as if the tree had created a world just for them, away from the palace, away from the village. But time doesn't stand still, even under the sacred Baobab. When they were older, things began to change. Temi was no longer just a boy sneaking away to the tree. He was a prince, the next in line to the throne, and with that came responsibilities. The elders of the village started talking about his marriage. "It's time," they said. "The prince must marry, and it must be a union that strengthens the kingdom." I saw Kemi the day she found out. She was sitting by the tree, her fingers brushing the roots as if searching for answers. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered when I approached her. I didn't know what to say. The whole village had heard the news. Temi's father had arranged for him to marry a princess from a neighboring kingdom. It was a union of power, of wealth, of tradition, but it wasn't a union of love. Kemi's eyes were filled with tears she didn't let fall. "I always knew," she said softly, "more to the tree than to me. A prince doesn't marry a girl like me." But even as the words left her lips, I knew she didn't believe them, and neither did Temi. He came to the Baobab that evening, as he always did, but this time, he was different. His face was hard, his hands clenched. "They can't decide this for me," he said, pacing under the tree's wide branches. "I won't marry her, Kemi, I won't." But Kemi was calm. She always was. "You have to. It's your duty." The words broke him, but not in the way you'd expect. Instead of giving up, he fell to his knees at the base of the tree, his hands pressed against the rough bark. "The Baobab tree," he said, "it has power, doesn't it?" Kemi shook her head. "It's just a tree." But even as she said it, we all knew that wasn't entirely true. The elders often spoke of the tree's ancient powers. It had been there for generations, long before the village was built. Some said the spirits lived within its roots, that it could grant wishes or tear lives apart. But no one really believed it, not fully. It was just an old story passed down. Yet, there was Temi, desperate, asking the tree for help. "If this tree has power," he said, "then let it decide our future. If we are meant to be together, then let it happen. If not, I marry the princess." Kemi stared at him, her eyes wide. "You can't just..." But before she could finish, the wind picked up. It was strange, sudden, and powerful, swirling around the tree. The branches swayed, creaking, as if the tree itself was listening. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath us trembled. I remember feeling the earth shift beneath my feet, and then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. Temi stood up, his face pale. "Did you feel that?" Kemi nodded, but neither of them spoke about it again. Not that night. They sat in silence under the Baobab tree, holding hands, staring at the stars. The next day, the elders announced that the wedding plans were moving forward. Temi would marry the princess in a month's time. The whole village was preparing, but there was a heaviness in the air. Temi still came to the Baobab tree, but he was quieter, more distant. Kemi too. They would sit side by side, but the weight of the future hung between them. And then it happened. On the day of the wedding, as the entire village gathered to celebrate, something changed. As Temi stood at the altar, the earth trembled again, just like it had beneath the baobab tree. This time, it wasn't just a small tremor. The ground shook violently, and the sacred baobab tree split right down the middle. Its massive trunk cracked open as if struck by lightning. The wind howled, and the villagers gasped in fear. The elder said it was a sign that the spirits were angry. The wedding was stopped immediately, and the princess's family left in a hurry, convinced that the union was cursed. But Temi, he didn't look afraid. He looked relieved. He ran to the baobab tree, with Kemi not far behind. The tree, once whole and strong, now stood in two halves, its roots exposed and tangled. But in that moment, it wasn't the tree that mattered. It was the two of them, standing together beneath its broken branches, hand in hand. "I told you," Temi whispered, pulling Kemi close. "I told you the baobab would decide." And from that day on, no one questioned their love. The tree had spoken, and the village had no choice but to listen. Temi never married the princess. He didn't have to. The baobab tree had made sure of that. Kemi and Temi were together, just like they had always been, two souls connected beneath the sacred tree, bound by something stronger than tradition, stronger than duty. It was love, pure and simple, and in the end, that's all that mattered.